This is for Group 2, Chapter 2, Roles of Assessment, to be discussed by Waferina Cheska, Mabingnay Cherilyn, and Barbasa Crystal. At the end of Chapter 2, the students are expected to explain the various roles of assessments to the learners, teachers, parents, and other stakeholders.
Assessment. The formal basis for making conclusions about students' learning and development is assessment. To improve students' learning and development, it helps us to define, identifying, designing, collecting, analyzing, understanding, and using information. The purpose of assessment is to gather significant information regarding student performances or progress, or to identify student interest so that learning process assessment can be made. Placement assessment. Placement assessment is used to examine a learner's early performance. A preparation exam is given by the teacher at the start of the class to determine whether the students have the essential abilities and knowledge. A placement test is a test given by a school to determine the academic or skill level of students, especially a new students, in order to place them in the correct class. For example, a test usually given to a student entering schools to assess their level of knowledge or skill in a variety of disciplines in order to place them in the proper courses or classes. Another example is research papers, exams, oral presentation, and individual creative or performance project. Formative assessment. Formative assessment is to monitor students' learning and provide ongoing feedback that both students and teachers can apply to enhance their instruction. Formative assessment in particular assists students to identify their areas of strength and weakness and focus on those that needs improvement. Example: using concept maps to illustrate how well students understand a subject is an example of formative assessment. Give one or two sentences stating the lecture's main point. Submit a research proposal to receive early feedback. Another example of formative assessment is those impromptu tests or private voting. Short tests that compare student performance to their classmates. 1 minute papers on a certain topic.
As feedback in order to modify the teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. It can be labeled as modes of formative assessment. Increasing formative assessment will lead to the following effects: reactivates or consolidates prerequisite skills or knowledge prior to introducing new material. Students come to the classroom with a broad range of pre-existing knowledge, skills, beliefs, and attitudes, which influence how they attend, interpret, and organize incoming information. How they process and integrate new information will affect how they remember, think, apply, and create new knowledge. Since new knowledge and skill is dependent on pre-existing knowledge and skill, knowing what students know and students can do when they come into the classroom or before they begin a new topic of study. It can help us craft instructional activities that build of students' strengths and acknowledge and address their weaknesses. Once prior knowledge and skill is assessed, there is a range of potential responses depending upon the type of course. The uniformity of results and availability and the type of supplemental materials and alternatives. For example, if a majority of the class possesses misconceptions or weak understandings of a concept that you viewed as a critical prerequisite, You may decide to include covering it in class, provide a supplementary session on it, or provide links to materials for students to engage with on their own. Focuses attention on important aspects of the subject. When we pay attention to things, we become mentally prepared for upcoming things that are, we remember those things. We become automatically ready for responding to stimuli. Attention improves sensory discrimination. We are exposed on a large number of stimuli, but attention separates its object from the rest and enables us to observe it carefully. Paying attention to objects or instruction leads to greater understanding and thus builds one's interest in the given subject. When one focuses his or her attention on the given topic, it saves time and energy of the teacher or the trainer, speeding up the learning process. Encourage active learning strategies. Active learning engages students in learning using activities such as reading, writing, discussion, or problem solving, which promote analysis, synthesis, and evaluation of class content. Active in-class learning also provides students with informal opportunities for feedback on how well they understand the material. Give students opportunities to practice skills and to consolidate learning. Um, letting learners practice using new knowledge and skills helps ensure they will remember and apply them, providing opportunities to apply what they have learned to real-world problems prepares learners to address challenges they may encounter in their work. Consolidate learning could mean asking students to test out the new skills, knowledge, or language they have gained through the course of the lesson or overall topic. There are many forms consolidation can take in the classroom, like a lesson summary, a final call for questions on the topic before the lesson ends, and lastly, an interactive PowerPoint quiz. And consolidation is a great tool for mixed ability groups and helps to create an open and supportive learning environment where students feel confident to speak up and ask for further explanation on a topic. Provides knowledge of outcomes and corrective feedback. Descriptive feedback should highlight gaps in understanding and specifically inform students on how they can improve their learning rather than listing what they got wrong, thus facilitating a reciprocal learning process between teachers and students. Help students monitor their own progress and develop self-evaluation skills. A close analysis of formative assessment data allows the teacher to examine their instructional practices in order to determine which are producing the desired results and which are not. Some that work for one group of students may not work for another group. Guides the choice of further learning activities to increase performance. Teaching students the requisite skills to monitor and take responsibility for meeting their goals creates self-regulated learners. Give students examples of high-quality work along with multiple opportunities to review and correct their own work to build independent and autonomous thinkers. And number 8, help students to feel a sense of accomplishments. There are a lots of ways to celebrate achievements. My example for this is you include visual clues in the classroom, like their pictures from favorite activities or reflecting on students' different personal achievements like academic, part-time job, or extracurricular activities, and discussing as a class what students are proud of. And individually, never underestimate the value of telling a students directly that you have noticed their achievement. You must show them that you have recognized their efforts to help them feel a sense of accomplishments and pride in what they're doing. Attributes of an effective formative assessment. The primary purpose of the formative assessment process, as conceived in this definition, is to provide evidence that used by teachers and by students to inform instruction and learning during the teaching learning process. Effective formative assessment involves collecting evidence about how student learning is progressing during the course so that necessary instructional adjustments can be made to close the gap between students' current understanding and desired goals. Formative assessment is not an adjunct to teaching but rather integrated into instruction and learning, with teachers and students receiving frequent feedback. Melmer, Burmaster, and James 2008 delineated 5 key attributes of an effective formative assessment. Number 1. Learning progression. Learning progression should clearly communicate the sub-goals of the ultimate learning goal. Number 2. Learning goals and criteria for success. Learning goals and criteria for success should be clearly identified and communicated to students. Number 3. Descriptive feedback. Students should be provided with evidence-based feedback that is linked to the intended instructional outcomes and criteria for success. Haiti and Timperley 2007 constructed a model of feedback to enhance learning. Discrepancies or gaps in the student's current actual performance and desired goal attainment can be reduced by both teacher and students through effective feedback that can answer 3 vital questions. where am I going, how am I going, and where to next. To discourage students from rote and superficial learning and incite them to do more, assessment feedback must address all three questions previously mentioned. Effective feedback can operate on any of four levels tasks. Four levels like task, process, self-regulation, and self-level. Numbers 4. Self and peer assessment. Both self and peer assessment are important for providing students an opportunity to think metacognitively about their learning. And lastly, number 5, collaboration. A classroom culture in which teachers and students are partners in learning should be established. Roles of assessment number 3, which is the diagnostic assessment, intended to identify learning difficulties during instruction, can detect commonly held misconceptions in a subject. This is not used as part of students' mark of achievement. So this assessment is used to collect data on what students already know about the topic. This assessment are sets of written questions like multiple choice or short answer that assess a student current knowledge base or current views on a topic to be studied in the subject. The goal of this assessment is to get a snapshot of where students currently stand intellectually, emotionally, or ideologically, allowing the teacher to make sound instructional choices as to how to teach the new subject content and what teaching approach is to use. They are often used pre and post instruction where students are given identical pre and post tests before and after the subject. This method allows teachers and students to chart their learning progress by comparing pre and post test results.
So the fourth role of assessment is the summative assessment. So summative assessment is done at the end of the instruction to determine the extent with which the student have attained the learning outcomes. So it is used for assigning and recording grades or certifying mastery of concepts and skills. An example of summative assessments is the written examination at the end of the school year to determine who passes and fails. So again, this summative assessment is done or used to evaluate the student learning, skill acquisition, and academic achievement to the conclusion of instructional period. Typically, at the end of the school year, unit, course, project, or semester. So, as it said, summative assessments are given to conclusion to a specific instructional period and therefore are generally evaluative rather than diagnostic. So they are more likely used to determine student learning progress and achievement, evaluate the effectiveness of educational programs, measure progress towards motivational goals, and the course placement discussion, among other possible actions. So there is an additional assessment that is called interim assessment. So note that it is not a part or role of assessment. Interim assessment falls between formative and summative assessment. So when we say formative. It is formative in a way that it has the same purpose as formative assessment, to enhance, to improve the teaching and learning process, and summative in a way that it is being administered at the end of the school year or course. So, as such, interim assessments are instructional, predictive, and evaluative. And it came from differentiated, instructionally embedded formative assessment that are given frequently, or summative assessment that have greater scope and longer duration cycle. Proceeding to the purposes and roles of assessment, it is being summarized and viewed as a taxonomy of approaches. So, Taxonomy of Assessment by Teranzini 1989 consolidates the what, why, and who of assessment. So, there are four dimensions of outcome. The first one is knowledge, or the breadth and depth of understanding. So, what do we mean by breadth and depth? So, this of understanding is an expression of the ability to operate, disciplinary boundaries in a coherent and productive way, with disciplines that drawn from different categories. So, depth of understanding depends upon the mastery of the body of knowledge, but it is not necessarily to be confused with knowledge itself, and not necessarily commensurate with the number of contents in the subject. So, in general, this breadth and depth of understanding are characterized by the ability to recognize the implications of the information at hand and put it into a broader context, or the ability to draw from different disciplines to provide a clearer and deeper understanding from the principles itself. So, with which the student is immediately concerned. So, these outcomes might be assessed in work of the piece of written work, such as independent research paper, an identification, and problem solving. So the second one is skills. So what are skills in learning? So learning skills describes is a term that describes the tasks involved in learning, such as time management, note taking, reading effectively, study skills, and writing tests. So a perfect example for the skills are good communication skills, critical thinking, and working well in a team. So the third one is attitudes and values. So it refers to the principles and beliefs that influences one's choices, judgments, behaviors, and actions on a path towards individual, societal, and environmental well-being. And the last dimension of outcome is behavioral outcome. So this learning out is stated in measurable terms, which gives students direction to their experiences and becomes the basis for students' evaluation. So take note that assessment improves teaching and learning, which is formative in function. And the placement and diagnostic assessment are likewise formative, that focused on in their individual level. If summative, the assessment is administrative in purpose, and it also has a gatekeeping function. So thank you for listening. I hope you get something from us. That's all we got to say. Thank you again.